Hello, friends, and welcome to this podcast. I'm going to talk about music. Long time ago, when I was a kid, there was another kid who used to come on the television all the time singing, and I thought this kid was the coolest kid in the world. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing coming from this other kid who was about my age. And he could sing and dance and all this stuff. You know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about Michael Jackson. I was not a huge later era Michael Jackson fan. I have to admit. I think I was not. I was one of the people who did not buy Thriller. I liked Off the Wall actually. The album that came before Thriller, I thought was pretty cool. But then it kind of, I don't know. I kind of didn't get into the whole Michael Jackson, you know, iconic Michael Jackson era that had so many people so enamored with him. He turned. I mean, he was quite good, and I mean the Quincy Jones production and all the songwriting and the playing and the Eddie Van Halen guitar solos and whatnot. It was all good stuff. Just wasn't my stuff. But I tell you what, I do really like still was that kid that I saw when I was a kid. Michael Jackson was on some shows on television that I remember seeing. I think like the Flip Wilson show and some other variety type shows. And it was like whenever they would say the Jackson Five are coming on, I was like, I love the Jackson Five. I was a, it was a invigorating thing to hear that, to hear them, and just this the music. It was like it was not like the music I was really listening to as a kid. You know, I was hearing things that my older sisters were listening to, like the Beatles and the Stones and all that. This stuff was driving, funky stuff that got me into liking a lot of the Motown stuff. I started, really paying attention to the Supremes and bands like that, and realizing what Motown was, that whole thing of Motown. And I started hearing different instruments too. I think around that time I was hearing different instruments. You know how sometimes when you're younger, you're not really paying attention to music all that much. Music just sounds like music, and you don't really differentiate what you're hearing. I started really hearing the bass guitar in there, and I started trying to. But you don't. I think. I think the impression that you're supposed to get from the Jackson Five when you would see them on shows like that, you saw them playing the guitars, you saw them, lip syncing, which everybody did back then. And you assumed, okay, all the Jackson brothers can play. I mean, look, he's playing the bass and he's playing the guitar, and they're all singing. But I think what was really going on was that they were singing. They were all singing, and then they had these studio musicians that would actually record the songs. So they had these incredible players playing on their records, and so then when they would get on the show and lip sync, they'd give them guitars and basses and make it look like they were the band. And nothing wrong with that really so much, but you did kind of, as you got older, realize it's like, okay, he's not really playing the bass. So who is playing that cool bass line in I Want You Back, or ABC? And when I first started playing guitars and bass, I always loved that bass line too. I Want You Back. And I finally learned it, and I used to play along with the record. I still do once in a while to kind of warm up, because it's kind of a hard one to play. There's a couple of little tricky things in there that little quick notes that he puts in between these parts. And I always thought it was this bass player named James Jamerson who played bass for a lot of the Motown hits. But it was not James Jamerson. It was a guy named Wilton Felder who played that bass line. And the guitar players were David Walker, Louis Shelton, Don Peake. These musicians, you don't really hear about them too much, but those are the people that played these incredible, funky, driving pop songs that are so incredible. And the Jackson 5 album that I want to talk about, I mean, they put out a few. Their first one was called, I believe it was called Diana Ross Presents the Jackson 5. And then they put out the album ABC, which was a huge hit. It was funny. I remember as a kid feeling a little bit embarrassed to buy that album because it looked like I was buying like a kiddie album or something, because it had them like a Sesame Street looking set on the front with the big ABC letters. It was almost like they were aiming it at children, like kiddie pop. But it was more sophisticated than that. I mean, you can still listen to this stuff now if you can get past all the Michael Jackson baggage and listen to it. It is a classic Motown hit, ABC and I Want You Back, and a bunch of their other songs. And so what I prefer, instead of the albums that had what, unfortunately, there's a bit of filler on their albums, but what I do recommend is the Jackson 5's Greatest Hits. And usually I'm not like a big fan of greatest hits, because I think bands put a lot of effort into creating an album and putting the songs in a certain order on an album, especially back in the vinyl days, where you'd have side A and side B, where you would have, this many songs on side A and this many songs on side B, and they would really work to make sure that all those songs flowed together, and then it ends at the end of side A, and then you pick it up and you flip it over and you play side B. And the idea of a greatest hits records, the idea of greatest hits records is that they're giving you all the hits from various records out of that context, and they're putting them together. And sometimes it's a little jarring to hear how they go from one song to the next in a way that it's like, wow, that doesn't really fit after that song. It's another upbeat pop song, and it doesn't seem as carefully organized as the album likely was. I don't think the band themselves were involved in organizing the songs on greatest hits albums, but this was a nicely organized greatest hits album, and I think actually this is my favorite Jackson 5 album by far. It's got no filler on it. It's all killer, and it's really fun to go back and listen to it. I know you've probably seen those performances and on YouTube or whatever, and probably heard these songs. I mean, I was walking through a really old-fashioned, very old-timey Italian neighborhood one time, very old village kind of a place, and it was so, I felt like I'd gone back in time. I was walking along, and then all of a sudden I heard that bass line, doom, da-da-da-da-dum, and I was like, it's the Jackson 5 coming out of somebody's house. And it was like, wow, that was kind of like a little taste of back home, and took me right out of the mood, but it was interesting to hear it, and you realize it's like, wow, Michael Jackson, international superstar, and the Jacksons and the Jackson 5 are everywhere. But this has got I Want You Back, it's got ABC, Never Can Say Goodbye, and I'll Be There. It's got some of those dramatic songs, those ballads and things like that, which I don't like quite as much as I do the songs like I Want You Back. I can listen to I Want You Back over and over. I love that song. I still pick up my bass and play along with that one because it's so fun to play along. If you're a musician, I know you have your songs that you like to play along with. That's one of my bass guitar songs that I like to play along with it because it's so fun to nail it, because sometimes I'll make mistakes, and then a couple of times I'll play it all the way through without making a mistake, and I'm like, yes, I did it. And I just love that bass line. I don't know. It's one of those things that you can, if if somebody comes over and you pick up your bass and you start playing that, everybody's like, oh, that's so cool. I love that song. And Wilton Felder played it, folks, not James Jamerson. Wilton Felder. And it's just a fun album to go back and listen to. The promise of this young man who went in such strange places as he got older, and I just lost it for him. I think Off the Wall was the last thing he did that I felt like it was really Michael Jackson. I felt like it was still him, and then I felt like he got sort of possessed or something by some really negative force in his life, unfortunately. But anyway, I really like that Jackson 5 Greatest Hits album. Uh, Listen to those great studio musicians backing up these great singers. You know, the whole Jacksons, all of them. You know, all of them are talented. There's no denying that. But I just love the youthful energy that they had when they were the Jackson 5. And thanks for listening. And I'll talk to you again real soon.